Our next speaker, Professor Bruce Maddy-Weitzman, is head of the International BA program here at Tel Aviv University and a senior research fellow at the Moshe Dayan Center. He teaches in the Department of Middle Eastern and African History and is an associate scholar at the Foreign Policy Research Institute in the United States. His most recent books are The Berber Identity Movement and the Challenge to North African States, which was published in 2011, and A Century of Arab Politics from the Arab Revolt to the Arab Spring, which was published in 2016. Today, Professor Maddy-Weitzman will be speaking about, the title of his lecture will be To Play by the Rules or Not, Modern Amazigh Identity in the Shadow of the Authoritarian State. Professor Maddy-Weitzman.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you. First of all, thanks to everyone at the Dayan Center, administrative staff, academic staff, for organizing this very stimulating and lively conference. I want to express my personal thanks to Professor Benjo, to Ofra, my dear friend, and congratulations, first of all, on the book, but also to thank you for pressuring me more than 20 years ago to participate in the original project, which we are reevaluating today, the Minorities and the Arab State. At that point, I said to Ofra that I really don't know much about Berbers in Algeria. And she said to me, go and learn. And I did. And having done so was a wonderful thing for me. It's taken me to places intellectually and geographically that I've never would have reached. And so, again, thanks, Ofra. Okay, onward. So when I speak about Berbers, or the more modern term Amazigh, which means free people in the Amazigh language, Tamazigh. For those who don't know, Berbers or Amazigh are the natives, the original population of North Africa west of the Nile. And as you can see on this map, the imagined community stretching all from the Sahel in West Africa up to the Mediterranean and all the way to the Siwa oasis in the Western Desert in Egypt, which is a Berber-speaking community. They are the original population. They go back to at least to the beginnings of recorded history. They speak a variety of related dialects and were traditionally socially organized in tribes and concentrated in particular geographic areas. This is a map of their traditional geographic areas. The big blue area are the Tuareg, the desert areas, but that's not where the largest numbers are. As you can see, 3 main centers in Morocco, 2 main centers in Algeria, and then scattered all over smaller pockets. Now, like the Copts, many Berbers don't even or reject the term minority being applied to them. Number one, because they claim to be have the original. They were the original inhabitants, and 2, they don't want to be. They don't want the status of being a minority with its implication of being less than equal applied to them. In any case, with all the changes in modernization and Arabization and national integration that have taken place in North Africa, among North African states, we can say that roughly Amazigh populations amounts to approximately 25 million people. That includes at least a million or so, or up maybe even 2 million in Europe, in the diaspora. So, as is the case with all social groups whom we loosely categorize as minorities, whatever the particular mix of religious, ethnic, linguistic, geographical, and historical factors are, being Berber has meant different things to different people depending on the time and place and the context. And relatedly, the political significance of Berber identity has varied also in time and place. So when speaking about the whole subject, we have to really strive for precision. We have to, I think it's useful to try to distinguish between the people themselves, Berbers or Amazigh, who can be found all across the political and social spectrums in North Africa and in Europe for that matter, from jihadi Islamists to radical secularists, from poor villagers to wealthy businessmen, from opposition activists to pillars of the regimes, from monolingual Berber-speaking illiterate women in remote Atlas Mountain villages to cosmopolitan multilingual intellectuals, as well as younger second and third generations of immigrants in Europe who are, in fact, rediscovering or reemphasizing their Berber identity without having mastery even of the language, of the Berber language, which is, of course, a central marker of their identity. So that's the human picture, if you will. That's one category that we have to keep in mind. And another is Berberness, per se, the combination of factors which enable us to recognize that there is a certain feel of Berber society, ranging from food and song and dance, other cultural expressions, to tribal ties and historical memory. And then the third, which is the one that interests those who are most interested in politics, I think, the third is Berberism, the ideology of being Berber, and which promotes a collective agenda, trying to raise the status of the Berber communities, of the Berber collective, if you will. Now, in my original article in the book. By the mid-1990s, indeed, the Berber question had made it onto the larger Algerian agenda within the context of the shortcomings of the post-independence state-building and nation-building efforts, and I probed that in detail. The question, of course, now is, where are we 20 years later, not just with regard to Algeria, but with regard to the larger space, if the larger Amazigh space. If you will, I'd like to borrow a phrase from the Mashriq, from the Arabian Nights. The Berber genie is out of the bottle. I would argue that within the increasingly charged and contested political environment in North Africa, that the Berber, number one, that the Berber Amazigh identity movement has registered important symbolic achievements, with the most central being the constitutional recognition by both Morocco and Algeria of Tamazight as an official language of the state alongside of Arabic, and of recognition of Amazighité, or if you will, or Berberness, Berber as being a fundamental component of each of those countries' national identity. This was a core demand by Berberists for many, many decades. Now, at the same time, of course, more concretely, translating those symbolic achievements into concrete ones remains, of course, enormously difficult. And I would also argue that in this context, and in the context of increasingly contested politics in general in both Morocco and Algeria, and in Libya for that matter, the discourse and praxis of the Amazigh current has become increasingly militant and even ethno-national, testing the rules or limits laid out by the authoritarian states. The trend witnessed in Algeria among the Kabyles, the articulation of a more modern ethno-cultural identity with some degree of social mobilization and increasing demands on the state, has continued to manifest itself and gain traction all over North Africa. And as a result, the post-colonialist regimes, which previously sought to keep the genie in the bottle and to reduce Berber identity to a folkloristic appendage of a modern Arab Islamic-based national identity, and here I can quote the famous Moroccan opposition figure known to many Israelis from a different context, Maddy Ben Barka, who said a Berber simply is someone who didn't go to school. So once he goes to school, he will stop being a Berber. And this was from his point of view, a secular socialist revolutionary, Ben Barka, that is. This was a desired outcome. But in more recent years, the regimes have been compelled to adopt alternative and more accommodating approaches primarily tactical, but sometimes more than that, all for the purpose of regime survival. Now, I don't really have a whole lot of time to go into things in detail. What I like to throw out is that when thinking about this, is that we examine the regime Amazigh dynamics through three partially overlapping sets of categories. And I don't think I'll be able to provide all the answers to that, but at least you can have the categories in mind. The first is let's say, if you will, a tension or a dichotomy between citizenship and ethnic particularism. How much of the Amazigh agenda is particularist and ethno-national and even separatist in nature and content, and how much is more national, referring to the state as a whole, that is to say, to be more integrative, to be more part of the state, and even as they want to change what it means to be a citizen of Morocco or Algeria. The second category that I would like to look at has to do with strategies, the strategies of both the state authorities and of the Amazigh communities. And that is said to look at the varying state policies and strategies of co-option and partial accommodation and repression and the responses of the communities. And the third has to do with activities in the field. To what degree has the Berber identity movement moved beyond intellectual circles? What strategies of social mobilization have they adopted? How has the Amazigh agenda been expanded? And what is the relationship between the movement or the activists or the variety of organizations promoting Amazigh identity? What is the relationship with other societal actors, both more sympathetic ones and more hostile ones? Some details now in the remaining amount of time that I have. That's the Amazigh flag with the letter Z in the Tifinagh script of the Amazigh language. King Mohammed VI, the Amazigh Dahir in 2001, wearing traditional Berber costume, if you will, headgear, and this was only 2 years after he assumed power and in his first decade in power, he took a number of symbolic and practical steps to promote the Amazigh identity within the context of the Moroccan nation. That is to say, to add the Amazigh and recognize Amazigh identity to the definition of what it means to be a Moroccan, and this continued with the step to introduce the teaching of the Amazigh language in Moroccan schools in 2003, and culminated, in a sense, in the constitutional recognition in 2011. And by doing so, by taking all these steps, he provided important royal legitimacy to the Amazigh cause, if you will, because after all, in Morocco, the king is beyond criticism. So if the king is for the Amazigh, and in fact he himself, his mother is Amazigh, as was her mother, this was the mother of his father. The king cannot be criticized. This legitimized the action. Now that's only part of the story because, as I said, progress has been slow. But bureaucracies are resistant, even when it comes to something so symbolic as wanting to give your newborn child an Amazigh name. Bureaucracy said, no, you can't name your child Massinissa or someone else from the Berber lexicon or historical memory. You have to call him Muhammad, or you have to call him Abdul Wahab or whatever. And this is an ongoing issue for Amazigh groups. And of course, there was much criticism from Islamist and Arab nationalist groups within society. The state refuses to allow an Amazigh political party to be to function, etc. And now some Amazigh activists were co-opted, and others criticized them, and this is a whole story in and of itself, the internal divisions within the movement. And then we can talk, I think, perhaps about how the movement has tried to penetrate beyond elites with linking social and economic agendas, the very real issues of poverty and neglect, especially in the peripheral areas, linking them to the ethnic issue. This is a picture of a poor girl who died because there was no MRI device in the local hospital, and they had to transport her 4 hours by ambulance to Marrakesh, and by then it was too late, and she became a cause célèbre for people. Here you can see people marching at her funeral in her village, draped in the Amazigh flag, and with other protests going on. Here we are all Idia, Je suis Idia, and Jamia Kuna Idia. These were, again, multilingual protests, as you can see. This is a different protest, different kind of social protest, very interesting one. Villagers conducting, it's already 6 years, I think, a sit-down strike against a silver mine owned by the king, which is draining the water from their lands. And you can see the ongoing marches, and the Amazigh flag there as well. Yeah, okay, well. The main area for a more sustained area of unrest, which combines social and economic issues with the ethnic dimension, is the Rif. Abdul Karim, the great the hero of the northern neglected Rifian region because of his struggle against the Spanish and the French in the 1920s. A book in his honor, Hero of the Rif, as you can see, a children's book. His flag is everywhere. In the 2011 protests, this is his abandoned headquarters. People took it over, and in 2016, we can say people talked about this. The Moroccan Mohsen Bouazizi from Tunisia. That is to say, the poor fishmonger in the northern city of Al Hoceima, who was ground to death by a garbage truck when he was trying to rescue his confiscated fish, and this. The protests that ensued continue right up until today, and you can see many pictures. This is the flag of Abdul Karim, and the person who then came to emerge as the leader of the protest, Nasser Zafzafi, who was descended from Abdul Karim, it turns out, from a family of activists. He is now in jail facing a life sentence for blaspheming the state, etc. In other words, the state finally cracked down on all of this. But it's again, very much a live issue. And again, here you can see another protest in Tetuan over another issue with I could go on, but this poster, I think, symbolizes the feeling both in Algeria and in Morocco and in Algeria. La Hokra in North African Arabic refers to basically the contempt that the authorities show to the population, contempt, the alienation that people feel as a result of the heavy-handed protests, heavy-handed policies that the states have imposed on them. Just for a couple minutes with regard to Algeria. Algeria, just after I published that article in the book, they had what they call the Black Spring. These were sustained protests, both civic and ethnic in dimension. 150 people approximately died in clashes with the authorities, and it's become an iconic moment in the fashioning of a collective identity in Kabylie, and even spawned an autonomy movement. And I can't say that this is a mass movement, but which has the possibility, realistically right now, of achieving autonomy for the central region of Algeria, the most well-defined ethno-national group among all the Berbers, the Kabyles. But these are open protests with Kabyle flags as well as with Amazigh flags. And this last picture actually is a very current one. The mass protests, the mass protests in Algeria, which are not dying down and are posing an enormous challenge to the regime. Within the protests, we see both a preponderance of Algerian national flags, but also Berber, Amazigh flags. And there's even been debate within the Amazigh activists about whether we should fly these flags or not. It might create a division, it might create tension, but overall we see that Kabyle and Amazigh identity is being asserted. The idea that there'll be a new Algeria, which is being promoted, well, yes, we want a new Algeria, a more democratic Algeria, Algeria that doesn't demonstrate contempt to us. And within that, we as Amazigh, both as individuals and as a community, need to be part of the solution. It's a long reach, of course, and maybe even utopic to expect that this is going to happen, but these ideas are there. So to conclude, and I know that I'm out of time, to reiterate, really, within this increasingly contested public space, the Amazigh movement has registered symbolic achievements. Translating them is going to be enormously difficult. The discourse surrounding the Amazigh question increasingly includes overt political terminology, regionalism, federalism, autonomy. Even some radicals among both the Kabils and the Rifians talk about self-determination. Activism is certainly on the rise all across the spectrum. Regimes have strategies. They know how to co-opt. They've played these games before. They have many tools in their kit box to divide and to weaken and to take the sting out of radical protest. But also, as we see in Algeria right now, past strategies don't always work. And so overall, I would say, reiterate again, that the genie, the Amazigh genie is out of the bottle. So far, that is the Berberists, the Berber communities, activists are playing by the rules set down by the authoritarian state, but they're also testing the limits of those rules and trying to actually push the states to change the rules of the game. All being done up to now in a peaceful manner. What will be those boundaries, where things will evolve, that's for the next conference. Thank you.